So now, it's not right. Yeah. So now we'll focus for the last 3 weeks of the course, of the semester. We'll focus on the new visibility of women and their entrance in the public sphere. We'll see that the perspectives are a little different from what we've already said about foreigners and the poor. There were many comparisons possible between the perception of the poor and the perception of foreigners, and the way they became a little more visible, a little more, maybe not yet audible, but already more visible in the public sphere. With the case of women, this new visibility would take different paths, which we're going to analyze, and to study these paths and how women entered the public sphere. I would like to start with a first presentation of the condition of women in the mid-19th century, let's say. You remember at the very beginning of the course, early in the semester, we read a few texts about the way women were perceived by authors. A poet, Coventry Patmore, you remember, an extract from the poem The Angel in the House. The Angel in the House, which is not particularly an interesting poem, but which has become the expression used by critics to refer to the Victorian bourgeois definition of woman at the time. A woman was supposed to be the angel in the house. That is, woman was supposed to be, well, everything is explained in the notion of angel. What does the notion of angel imply? What are the purity? Yes, woman was supposed to be pure. She was supposed to be a symbol of purity. What else in angel?
They have to be perfect.
Perfection, yes. Perfection, purity, no weakness in women. Yes, so perfection, purity. What else? Yeah.
I'm not sure if the angels belong to.
Well, I know no angel personally, so I'm not sure. But yeah, you're right about one point. An angel, when you have representations of angels, they are visual representations. Generally, they do not talk. You're right. Yeah, it's an interesting remark.
And also the angel, the mission of angel is, like they have to obey their masters. Yeah.
Yes.
Always.
You seem to know a lot about angels. Yes, an angel is supposed to. Well, an angel. What is the? In the great chain of being in the Renaissance, what was the place of angels? Between.
Second part.
Yeah, absolutely. Between God and human beings. Which shows you that the place of woman was completely different. And this is why you cannot completely compare the situation of women with that of the poor or with that of foreigners at the time. They were considered to be angels. Angels are between God and human beings. So women were seen in a positive light, in a way, as long as they remained angels in the house. That is, as long as they imitated, in a way, the image that men wanted them to be. As long as they acted like angels, right? So this is very important because it shows you that you can't completely compare them with the poor or with foreigners. So, an angel means purity. It means, you've said, perfection, purity. What else?
Beauty.
You've said also,
Beauty.
Beauty, absolutely, beauty, perfect beauty, almost. Ethereal beauty, something almost unreal in a way. You've said obey the master, that is, obey God. Yes, an angel is also someone who is supposed to be submissive. Submissiveness, which is also one of the definitions of what women should be at the time. So submissiveness, beauty, perfection, a kind of ethereal side. Sorry? Yes, protective, caring about others. A woman was supposed to protect the household. She was supposed to protect children, but she was also supposed to protect her husband. You remember the text we read by John Ruskin, a philosopher of the time, who explained in the text that, of course, men needed women, and women were not the doers. Men were the doers, but women, they simply were. They simply were. They did not act, they were. And their presence was essential, according to John Ruskin, as long as they were and did not act. So the notion of submissiveness, the notion of purity, the notion of perfection, the notion, an angel is also what, and it's also a very important aspect of angels, which was supposed to be characterizing women at the time.
They are children?
Yes, they are children. Generally, they are represented as children. So they are closer to children than to adults. So this notion is also important. A woman was not compared with a child, but she had about the same prerogatives as a child, in a way. And because they are seen as children, well, there's an expression in French which speaks of le sexe des anges. No? Angels are supposed to have... Well, they are not sexual beings, in a way. It's rather this idea. They are not sexual beings, exactly as women were supposed to be non-sexual beings at the time. Well, of course, people knew that they could have sexual relationships, and they knew that if they wanted to have children, then they had to have sexual relationships. This they knew. But they considered that women did not like sexual relationships, that it was a kind of duty for a married woman to have sex with a husband once upon a time, to have a child, but that was all. This was at least the fantasy about women, which doesn't mean that in reality this was the way all people acted. So this, this sexlessness, in a way, the fact that angels are almost genderless, sexless, is also very important in the way the Victorians perceived women. And then you have the expression in the house, the angel in the house. So in the house confined women to the private sphere, to the world of the house. That is, confined women to the tasks of decorating the house, managing the house as well, but not entering the public sphere, not interacting with the external world. And this was true until, I would say, yes, after the second part of the 19th century. Of course, when I'm speaking of angels in the house, this corresponds to the definition of the bourgeois Victorian woman. It's obvious that when you take examples, you take as examples girls living in the working class of the time, or living in poverty, well, these women had no choice but to leave the house for a living, simply. Sometimes as prostitutes, sometimes as food sellers, sometimes as, I don't know, workers in a factory, etc., etc. So the notion of the angel in the house corresponded both to the definition of femininity, but also at the same time to a certain social class. It was a certain social class, the Victorian bourgeois, the Victorian aristocrats, who defined women as angels in the house. And the other women were very often considered to be sinners because they did not correspond to this image of the angel in the house. This is why there was this fascination when the Victorian urban explorers went to the slums and saw women living side by side with men in the public sphere and in promiscuity in a room, for instance, where sometimes 3-4 couples slept together, well, maybe not together, but in the same room, and they imagined the type of relationships that this entails, the lack of intimacy. And this is why what fascinated them at the same time, because it was something that they deemed was forbidden in their world. And this is why they were at the same time disgusted, but also fascinated. So the angel in the house was this image of the perfect woman, the perfect Victorian woman, and you can see many representations of this angel in the house in the novels of the time, in the Victorian novels or Victorian short stories or Victorian paintings. You have many representations of them. And then little by little, this did not come very abruptly. Of course, this came as a long process. Little by little, because some women started to think that their place was a very confined one and that they wanted to do something else with their lives, little by little, women started to get emancipated. And it is on this emancipation, which meant more visibility for women in the public sphere, especially for Victorian bourgeois women, that I would like to focus. And before focusing on the reasons for this new visibility, for this emancipation of women, I would like to analyze a few texts, a few pictures especially, representing the way the emancipation of women, their new visibility in the public sphere, was perceived by male artists, cartoonists at the time. Because it's a very good way to see the difficulties that women had to face so as to become what they are today and to have the place that they have today in Western societies. Well, this first picture is not a British one, it's an American one, but I thought it was interesting to analyze it all the same, because the emancipation of women, of course, took place in many European and countries and in America at about the same time. It is taken from Puck magazine, an American magazine, and it was published in 1906. Well, look at the scene. Where does it seem to be taking place? It's not a pub because it's in the United States. It's rather a bar, a saloon, a kind of bar saloon or something like that. Mrs. P.J. Gilligan. So you see first the owner of the bar. The owner of the bar is a woman, Mrs. P.J. Gilligan, which already comes as a shock in a way. And she seems to have proudly written her name, you see, above. There are many details in this picture, and this is why I wanted to choose it as a starting point. Many pictures, both in the background and in the characters that are being presented here. We'll first focus on the background. What can we see on the background? In the background, sorry. So, price lunch. Look here, for instance, gentleman's parlor. What is it a reference to, according to you? This gentleman's parlor. What does it imply about women? There are no men inside, you see, just women. Yeah?
It implies that
Yeah, it implies that it is exactly the opposite of what existed at the time. That is, in many public places at the time, restaurants, bars, etc., pubs, generally the place was for men, and there may be sometimes a place just for women to meet and to be in safe company together. So it was rather the ladies' parlour, generally, that you found in such places. Certainly not the gentlemen's. So it's a kind of inversion of what existed generally at the time. That is a mostly male public space with an isolated place for women. Here you have exactly the opposite. Men are just a kind of accessory here, and women are dominant. So this is already interesting in itself. All the other bills or posters, bridge cocktails, which means that these women also drink alcohol. The Evelyn Cassidy Association, dance smoker. So almost all the posters are about women themselves, right? Implied in or involved in different types of activities. That may be sport, that may be dancing, that may be smoking, etc. You see that most women are heavy smokers, it seems. See this woman here, you have this one here, you have this one here, and smoking was not considered at the time to be a womanly leisure or a womanly activity. It was typically associated with gentlemen, certainly not women, at least in the bourgeois society. What is also striking in the way these women seem to be behaving here, beyond the fact that they're smoking for most of them?
The way they are depicted here is like men, you know.
Yeah.
They're not like having women.
Absolutely. They are depicted with what at the time was supposed to be a man's attitude, a man's behavior. The way this woman is looking at the children is quite interesting, for instance. This was typically not, at the time, the way a woman should deal with children. This was typically rather a male attitude at the time. The fact of, she seems to be bothered by the children. Obviously, she doesn't feel like taking care of them. And this, in itself, was something completely transgressive at the time, both in Great Britain or, in this case, in the United States. They seem to be more interested in smoking their cigarettes than in taking care of the children, for instance. The mannish attitude, once again, according to the definitions of the time, the mannish attitude is also shown, for instance, in the way this woman is standing against the bar, like this. She seems to be very self-confident, whereas women were supposed to be submissive. She seems very self-confident. The other woman also seems to be self-confident, and they seem to be having a conversation together, almost a mannish conversation. Once again, according to the definition of the time. The way they speak, the way they're standing, you have the same with these two women as well. And even their features or their general appearance looks mannish in a way. You do not have the contrast between the beautiful, pure woman that was often described in texts of the time or cartoons of the time, and more self-confident men. Here, the women themselves seem to be very self-confident and seem to have mannish manners. So this is a first example of a kind of projection of what the future may look like if women got emancipated. And typically this cartoon was made by a man who probably was at the same time partly amused, but also partly afraid of what may happen if women became like this. And he obviously plays on the notion of transgression. These women are doing what they are not supposed to be doing. That is, they are speaking together in a bar, in a public space. They are smoking. They act like men, as men were supposed to act at the time. They seem to need no man around them. They are on their own, and the men are relegated to the background in the gentleman's parlor. They don't seem to be taking care of their children, etc., etc. That is, they completely transgress the norms of femininity of the time. So this is a first example. A second example is this one. This one is taken from Punch magazine, so British magazine, in 1914. Where does the scene take place? According to you. Well, maybe you... Yeah. Shy and nervous husband, abandoned in costume department by his wife, who has gone to the fitting room to have her dress fitted, and surrounded by tall and beauteous young ladies, whose only business seems to be to make him feel like a worm. So yes, they are in the department store. We'll speak about the department store later. They are in a department store, and obviously what is striking in this picture, in this cartoon, is the position of the man in the middle of the cartoon, but he seems to be dwarfed. You understand? Dwarfed. Mm-hmm. He seems to be dwarfed. He's almost crouching like this. How would you define his state of mind at the moment? He's said to be shy and nervous. Why? Yeah. Absolutely, because he is out of place. He is in a purely feminine environment. In a purely feminine environment, he's surrounded by women all standing, so they seem to be very tall. They seem to be very self-confident at the same time. So again, there's a transgression of the allegedly normal situation, the allegedly normal, that is according to the norms, the allegedly normal relationship between men and women at the time, with obviously women taking the upper hand on the man here, who seems to be dwarfed, to be submissive, to be everything that the woman was supposed to be at the time, while the women are self-confident, self-assertive, obviously, and seem to behave as men were supposed to behave at the time. The notion of the department store is particularly interesting because, as we'll see, the department store was one of the first places of emancipation for women. Why? Because when department stores started to develop in the second part of the 19th century, they were immediately almost exclusively designed for women. That is, the first designers of department stores, and for instance in Great Britain there was Harrods, the famous department store, which was created at the time. And when Harrods was created, it was same thing with Selfridges. Selfridge was an American businessman who came to London to build a Selfridge building in Oxford Street. And when Selfridges opened, well, exactly as with Harrods, the aim was to be a kind of female paradise, a kind of public space, because the department store is a public space, a public space for women, but a public space protected from the dangers of the open world. This is how the first businessmen who created department stores decided. This is what they decided to do with department stores. That is, a public space for women to go with other women most of the time. This was generally a place you visited with female friends, but a place you could visit without being bothered by the presence of men. And generally, in department stores, you had a kind of a gentleman's parlor as well, in which men who accompanied their wives could go and listen to music or read the papers or read books, while the women spent their day sometimes at the department store. So it was a female place. And because it is a female place, outside the home, the man here is presented as uncomfortable, ill at ease, because he's not in a world that corresponds to his gender. And he feels completely displaced, dispossessed of his place. So this is another of the cartoons of the time, which showed what it meant for men, because these cartoons were generally produced by men, which showed what it felt for men to be dispossessed in a way, dispossessed of their identity, of their power, rather, dispossessed of their power in some places like the department store. And this example is a very good one. The next element of emancipation was the bicycle. I would say that all the tools of emancipation of women in the 19th century participated in allowing women to enter the public sphere, to enter the public place, the public space. The department store was one of these tools. It allowed women to leave the protected sphere of the home, to enter another protected sphere, but a protected sphere that was outside in the public space. So it was already a step forward. And the second tool, a completely different one this time, was a means of transport, the bicycle. The bicycle, which started to develop in the second part of the 19th century, and which was particularly enjoyed by women at the time. And lady cyclists, as they were called, started to be seen in the streets, in the countryside, etc. And the thing with bicycles is that very often these women cyclists rode on their bicycles on their own. That is, the bicycles were an element of a tool of freedom for them. They could take the bicycle and go into the public space wherever they wanted. Well, of course, there were many criticisms by men at the time against these lady cyclists, and we'll read several articles on this with the type of commentaries that were made against women.
That's why Dim used it a lot in the commercials.
That's why. That's
Dim,
what. Oh yeah, absolutely.
He used it a lot in the commercials.
You're right. You're right. It's really a tool, or it was really a tool of emancipation. And there was all this this debate around the proper way to be dressed when you went riding a bicycle. Because of course, with the long dresses of the time, the crinolines, etc., it was very difficult to ride a bicycle. And whenever women at the time showed even a part of their ankles, they were immediately associated with prostitutes, or almost with prostitutes. So there was a debate around this, and around what was called rational dress for women. That is a type of costume that was adequate, that was decent, but at the same time which allowed them to ride a bicycle easily and properly. So this is another tool of emancipation. Still another tool was the development of museums, exhibitions, that is, places with an educational purpose. And these places with an educational purpose could be visited by women, and were more and more visited by women, sometimes in groups, sometimes on their own. They were places, once again, outside the home, in the public sphere, but they were protected places at the same time. That is, once the women were inside the museum or were inside the exhibition, they were supposed to be protected from the outside world. The exhibition, the museum, were places of knowledge. They were places of protection in the sense that they brought knowledge, and they were within the public sphere, but still being protected from the possible dangers of outside. Now, we'll look at a series of cartoons, all of them by men. There were very few women cartoonists at the time. The first one by Georges du Maurier in Punch magazine, once again, what it will soon come to in February 1894. And very often, cartoonists of the time, when they evoked what was called the woman question, because it was called the woman question, and the newspapers, the journals, the magazines of the time very often dealt with the woman question. The woman question was simply the desire of women to get emancipated and their new visibility in the public sphere due to this emancipation. And very often, when they evoked this, writers and cartoonists try to project themselves in the future and imagine what the future would be once women were emancipated. Well, this is an example. Oh, you can't see much. With the sun, reflection of the sun. Thank you. Yeah, so this one, what it will soon come to, Miss what? Simpson, yeah. Miss Simpson, pray let me carry your bag, Mr. Smithery. So, a very simple encounter in the countryside, apparently. A young woman meeting a man, and the man is carrying a bag, and the woman is simply asking, let me carry your bag, Mr. Smithery. How is this transgressive, or how was this supposed to be transgressive at the time? Well, there's of course not much shocking about it for us, but
I think by showing this, it tries to show, by giving this back to that woman, you give the power to that woman.
Absolutely.
To be independent.
She becomes, yes, by asking a man to do something for him, in a way, she inverts the notion of gallantry, which was a very important notion at the time, especially for gentlemen. Gentlemen were supposed to do this or that when they were with women, like carrying their bags or etc. So by simply offering, which seems to be completely innocent, by simply offering to carry the bag of this man, she transgresses the supposedly normal relationship between men and women in the Victorian period. And you see how the cartoonist Georges du Maurier seems to imagine that this is almost science fiction, you know, what it will come to, what it will soon come to, as if in the very near future, that is at the turn of the 20th century, society would become completely upside down, with women taking the upper hand on men, on very simple and innocent things like carrying the bag for them. So you see, it was not only on a sexual liberation, for instance, that men were afraid of this revolution, of this emancipation of women. But it could be sometimes on very simple details like this, which, in a way, turned things upside down, turns their vision of society upside down and turns their vision of the relation between genders upside down. So the idea of a woman asking a man to carry his bag for him. Second example, the feminine faculty. New housemaid to her master. Oh, sir, I'm glad, on regardera les images après. I'm glad you've come in. There's a party awaiting in the surgery to see you. It was Mrs. Dr. Mandragora Nightshade who had called professionally about a case. She would come in, sir. And I think, shuddering, it's a man in woman's clothes, sir. So, let's look at the pictures. You have a maid and her master here. They are speaking together in the hall. And in the waiting room, you have this woman. How can you describe the woman or the way she is described? The way she's presented. Is she presented as a beautiful woman? Obviously not. She's the typical representation of, at the time, what was called the spinster. The spinster. You know what a spinster is? Yeah? La vieille fille. La vieille fille. The spinster. With her, you know, her, I don't know what to call this, the kind of the glasses that she has, but I don't know the word for this, either in French or English. You know, this type of glasses, which generally men used. What else in her appearance is the opposite of what a woman was supposed to be like?
She's looking at a skull?
Yes, she's looking at a skull, absolutely. Why is she looking at, and you see there is the telescope, she seems to be much interested on all that there is on he's probably a doctor here, on all that there is on the doctor's table here. So she's examining a skull, absolutely.
She's a doctor, and in that time it was really strange a woman to become a doctor?
Of course, yes, there were almost no women doctors. Yeah, so she's a doctor. She's a doctor, a female doctor, which was very rare at the time. The picture dates back to 1873, so there were probably just a few women doctors. Well, there were very few women going to university at the time, so there were also very few women doctors. And what is interesting is, of course, the reaction of the maid. The maid is typically the submissive. She's submissive as a maid, but also probably submissive as a woman. And her analysis of the other woman is quite interesting. She seems to be speaking of her as if what? When he says, she would come in, sir, and I think it's a man in woman's clothes.
She's confused about her identity.
Yes, she's confused about the woman's identity because to her, in the world, in the society in which she's been raised, and with the norms that society has imposed upon her, a woman can't be a doctor. A woman can't be interested in examining a skull. A woman can't be interested in looking through a microscope, for instance. This is the idea. And she's so confused that she hesitates between he and she. You know, she would come in, sir, and I think it's a man in woman's clothes, sir. So, identity confusion. This was very often the case when cartoonists at the time described emancipated women. Very often they insisted on the fact that their identity was blurred, that they were neither men nor women, that they were, well, of course, transgenderism did not exist at the time, well, it's not that it did not exist, but it was not discussed at the time, and the term itself did not exist, I guess. But it's exactly the same type of reaction, a kind of confusion about identity. She's neither man nor woman. And the maid, the fact that the maid thinks so, the fact that the maid refuses the idea that a woman can be a doctor, and that probably, according to him, this woman is an imposter. She seems to be afraid. And you see, when she speaks about her, she says there's a party awaiting in the surgery. She doesn't say there's a woman or there's a lady or there's a gentleman. She says there's a party, which is completely neutral, as if she didn't want to name the gender of this party. So it's a quite interesting representation of this confusion of identity that was entailed, especially among men, but also among women, when some women started to get emancipated and started to take on the jobs of men, or to be educated like men, to be doctors like men. Well, only a few of them could at the time, but still they confused many people. Look at this one. Angel in the House, this time with a capital H, or the result of female suffrage. And this one is from 1884, when the notion of female suffrage started to be discussed. We'll devote a class to this, so I won't say more, but the idea of female suffrage was starting to be discussed. Look at the ridiculous representation of this woman. Where is she? The angel in the house, but with a capital H. Why? Which house is it here?
House of Lords.
Yes, the House of Lords, or the House of Commons, rather, of Lords here. Yes, the House, of course, Parliament. So there's a play on Coventry Patmore's poem, Angel in the House. And the angel in the house, the idea of the angel in the house has been completely transgressed now that the woman is a kind of parliamentary politician. So the angel in the House of Lords. So you see how she's surrounded by only men. And what is interesting is the way she looks. Obviously, she looks like a man in women's clothes, again. That is, the Punch magazine, or the cartoonist in Punch magazine, wanted to make her look like a man, or at least what a man was supposed to look like. The only thing which indicates she's a woman is what?
The way she goes like that?
No, I don't think so. I don't think it was very feminine to be standing like this. No, it's the dress. The dress here. But otherwise, in her attitude, in the type of glasses, well, the wig, of course, was a wig, so she obviously, the type of features, she obviously looks like a man. What is interesting is to have a look at what is around her. Look. What is this? Wool. Wool. To indicate that as a woman she was probably knitting. She, as if to reduce woman to knitting, and to say, well, she may be a politician, but still her main activity is to knit her thighs or whatever it is. So it's, or it's a sock. I don't know what it is exactly. A sock, maybe? No? A sock or something? Well, never mind. But you see the opposition between the fact that this woman seems to be emancipated. She's a politician, like men at the time. But at the same time, she's reminded of her own condition with the reference to the wool and the reference to the stock, to the sock, sorry, or the stockings, as if in a way, politics was just a kind of game for her, as if she couldn't be taken seriously as a politician, because she would still be a woman knitting her socks when she's back home. The next one. This one is from 1853, so even before. So, and it's about the parliamentary female. So probably the first women who entered parliament at the time. Look at the legend. Ladies of the creation, or how I was cured of being a strong-minded woman. The parliamentary female, father of the family. Come, dear, we so seldom go out together now. Can't you make us all to the play tonight? Mistress of the house and MP. How you talk, Charles. Don't you see that I'm too busy? I have a committee tomorrow morning, and I have my speech on the great crochet question to prepare for the evening. So, can you discuss the picture now? Taking the text into account. Sorry. So once again, a picture which is based on an inversion of norms, of Victorian norms. You can divide the picture into two perfectly equal parts. On the right-hand side, you see a woman. She's a parliamentary woman, that is an MP, a member of parliament. And she's surrounded by what mostly? Well, it's a mess, obviously, but books, which is already something not associated to women normally, especially such kinds of books. What kind of books are they? Women at the time were supposed to read books about other women, for instance, or romances, or books for children. Certainly not petitions, the Morning Chronicle, the Times, certainly not the newspapers, certainly not what was linked with politics, what was linked with suffrage, politics, etc. So the fact that she should be surrounded by books that were not the type of books that women read mostly at the time is already a sign of transgression here. What is implied by this mess around her?
The drawer implied that she can't.
The draftsman.
Yeah,
The drawer, c'est le tiroir.
she can't handle a job.
Sorry, she?
She can't handle a job.
Yeah, absolutely. That she has trouble handling the job. That she is obviously in a difficult situation, in a rough patch. There are all these books here, many things also in the bin, as if she had drafted different speeches and the speeches were not satisfactory, so she got rid of the first drafts. So she seems to be almost uncomfortable. She wants to do what she can, but she doesn't seem to be handling the job properly. This is what is implied. And you see the way she looks. What can you say for a woman of her time? She's not particularly shown as masculine this time. But what is the problem for the Victorians of the time when they look at this woman?
She's neglected.
Yeah, absolutely. She seems not to care about herself, not to care about her appearance. You see, her hair, especially, is not particularly the type of hair that a woman of her countenance at the time of her social milieu would have. So it's not here that he has masculinized the woman, but he has made her, or he made her less feminine by showing the fact that she doesn't care about her appearance any longer. Now, if you look at the other half, what can you see in the other half?
It's so clear when we look at their conversation. In this picture, it really reduced the gender role of the man. The way the husband talking to the woman is just like the man is the woman. And
Absolutely. So the way the man complains about the fact that they don't do anything together, that she's too busy with her job, etc., seems to be a reversal of the usual situation at the time when the woman complained about this to her husband, and the husband said, well, I have no time to spare. And of course here it's the father who is taking care of the children, while the mother seems to be completely ignorant of the children, and they are still small children, these three. Well, the others may be children, well, they may be children or they may be maids, it's not entirely clear. Probably partly children, I guess. So, I mean older children and younger children. So again, this opposition between the two, and again, the idea that the woman can't handle the job, but there's also a reference, a very ironical reference in the text, in the legend, to reduce again the woman to her condition. Which one? Yeah.
Great crochet question.
Yeah, absolutely, the great crochet question. As if the only thing that women could deal with in Parliament were very domestic questions, in fact. Certainly not the future of the country, but very basic questions, domestic questions. So it's exactly like, you know, the wool and the stockings or the sock in the other picture. It's reducing women, even if they have become someone else, even if they have tried to enter the male sphere, the public sphere, to reduce them to what they were supposed to do. In fact, to present them as imposters. They can just, in a way, imitate men, but not be like men. This is what was implied. The next one is also interesting. The new woman, so we'll describe the picture, but this is the dialogue. You're not leaving us, Jack. Tea will be here directly. Oh, I'm going for a cup of tea in the servants' hall. I can't get on without female society, you know. So, two women discussing together. They are not particularly masculinized here, except for one detail.
The way they are positioned.
They were tied?
The way they are positioned.
Yes, the way they are sitting in the armchairs. Yes, this is typically not a female position according to the Victorian norms. Typically not. You see, lying back in the chair like this. A woman was supposed to be demure. And sitting completely differently from this. So the way they are lying back in their armchairs, and also
they wore a tie.
Yeah, and the tie as well, yeah. So this makes them masculine in a way. And what is interesting, of course, is the reaction of the man. Why is he leaving the room? Because to him there is no woman in the room. And he prefers to go to the servants' parlor, because there are maids, and he prefers the company of maids, even if they are of a lower social class, than the company of these women, who to him are not women any longer. Vous comprenez d'où viennent tous les clichés qui existent encore aujourd'hui. Another one. No, this one is not. No, this one is less interesting. No, the other one is... yeah, this one. This one. It's Don Quixote. Don Quixote. And the legend is a world of disorderly notions picked out of books, crowded into her imagination. So it's a sentence taken from the book Don Quixote by Cervantes, except that it has been adapted to a woman, not crowded into his imagination, but her imagination. And what is interesting, what it means is that Don Quixote was a man whose imagination was fueled by what he read in books. And here, the new woman, Don Quixote, the new woman is shown as well as a woman whose imagination has been fueled by what she read in some books. And of course, what is the implication when you compare someone with Don Quixote? Qu'est-ce qu'on dit de Don Quichotte? Il combat les moulins à vent. Qu'est-ce que ça veut dire? It means that this fight is completely useless. Absolutely. What? Yeah? Yeah. Well, as well. It means that his fight is ridiculous, that his fight is completely useless, that he has a lot of imagination, but that his fight means absolutely nothing, which immediately reduces this woman asking for emancipation. We'll see how it's expressed in the picture, which immediately ridicules this woman, this Don Quixote, and reduces her fight to a useless fight. Again, debasing the fight of women for their emancipation. Well, look at the picture. In the background, you see a representation of a female Don Quixote fighting against the windmills. Again, this notion of a useless fight, except that on the horse, it is a woman fighting, no longer a man. So this notion of the fight. Here you have a woman and she's holding a kind of post with a flag. And what is written on the flag? Divided skirt. Divided skirt. That was a fight of the time, fighting for the divided skirt. What is a divided skirt, according to you? Not really. C'est ce qu'on appelle maintenant les jupes culottes. Hein? Les jupes culottes, oui, c'est une sorte de pantalon, mais qui ressemble à une jupe. Et pourquoi divided skirt? Parce que c'était tout un débat à l'époque, que pour pouvoir faire notamment du vélo, pour pouvoir faire du sport, etc., les femmes avaient besoin de porter un divided skirt. Sauf que certains hommes, notamment, et certaines femmes bien pensantes, considéraient que c'était tout à fait scandaleux de porter un divided skirt. C'était certes mieux que des pantalons pour des femmes, mais ça n'était pas approprié. Donc, on présente vous voyez le drapeau, il est fait comme une jupe culotte divisée en deux, divided skirt, hein, de la même manière. Donc on présente cette bataille comme complètement ridicule là aussi, hein, complètement ridicule de se battre pour avoir une jupe divisée en deux. Here, what is this creature? It's a kind of it's a kind of dragon, yeah. And so a dragon is what kind of creature? A nice creature or a frightening creature? Generally frightening, yes. And on the dragon there is one word written, decorum. What does it mean, decorum? What is decorum? Le décorum, c'est la bienséance, c'est tout ce qui est le décorum, on dit hein, en français quelquefois, c'est la bienséance, tout ce qui est approprié. As if decorum was something frightening for this woman, because she also fights against decorum. She doesn't want to, she doesn't want to follow the norms of this Victorian decorum. So the decorum is presented as a kind of dragon attacking this woman. The fact that she's looking for freedom, how is it showed in the picture?
She has a key.
Yeah, the key which may be the key to freedom. And she is also holding her arm like this, upright, and it seems to symbolize her willingness to get this power and to get this freedom. So here probably also a woman as a soldier. Also an image of woman that was more or less refused at the time. And especially she is surrounded, but it's especially true in the lower part of the text, she's surrounded by books, everywhere books. And among the books you have Mona Caird, which was a book about a new woman. You have Ibsen, a Norwegian playwright who wrote a lot about emancipated women. There was especially this play, A Doll's House. You have Tolstoy, that is authors that were supposed to be subversive for the time, and especially about for their vision of women. And here you have Mrs. Sir Burris with Mama. And here I can't see what is written here. Can you guess or not? It's difficult to see. I think it's the three heads of what the woman doesn't want to be. She doesn't want to be like her mama, because her mama was submissive. And she doesn't want to be like Chain. I don't know. I really don't know. And here again, there's something written, but I can't really see. So you see here, the author, the cartoonist, shows this woman as a delusive woman, as a woman who is dreaming that she's going to become free, whereas her normal situation, according to the Victorians, was to be a submissive woman. And obviously, when you look at her, once again, she's typically the spinster. She's not particularly she's not particularly beautiful. She's not particularly feminine in the way she's described, at least according to the definition of femininity of the time, of course. I'd now like to have a look at two short texts. The first one here, so we've seen representations in cartoons, but I'd like you to have a look at, well, when I find it, yes. This text, published in 1894 in The Sketch, so British newspaper, and speaking about lady cyclists. At the forthcoming council meeting of the National Cyclists Union, the following resolution will appear on the agenda. That in order to discountenance cycle racing and record breaking by women, the handicappers, timekeepers and judges of the NCU be requested to refrain from handicapping, timing or officiating in any way at any meeting where women are accepted as competitors, or where any woman takes part in a time trial. That the union permit be refused for any meeting to be held under NCU rules where women are allowed to compete, and that no record made by a woman be acknowledged by the union. Est-ce que vous comprenez ce texte? C'est donc une règle qui apparemment a été sortie en 1894 par la National Cyclists Union, donc une association sportive, Association nationale des cyclistes. Qu'est-ce qu'elle dit, cette règle? Bon, c'est un peu compliqué avec les handicappers, timekeepers and judges, mais qu'est-ce qu'elle dit en gros, cette règle? Elle empêche quoi, en fait? Et ça montre très bien le discours masculin de l'époque. Elle empêche les femmes de participer à des compétitions cyclistes. Donc, elle dit clairement que pour empêcher justement les femmes de faire du vélo en compétition et surtout de battre des records, parce que c'est ça qui les embêtait, je crois, de battre des records. Ils demandent donc, handicapers, c'est ceux qui mettent des handicaps, je ne sais pas à quoi ça correspond exactement. Vous savez, il y a des handicaps dans certaines courses, selon son âge, etc. Donc c'est ça. Donc ceux qui prennent le chronomètre, enfin qui chronomètrent, ou que ceux, bon bref, qui font quelque chose dans l'organisation des courses, on leur demande de ne pas faire leur boulot à chaque fois qu'une femme est acceptée comme candidate, enfin comme concurrent dans la course. Et qu'on ne donne pas la permission aux femmes de concourir dans des courses, ou en tout cas qu'on ne donne pas le sceau, j'allais dire, de la National Cyclists Union, c'est-à-dire que si des courses s'organisent avec des femmes, alors dans ce cas, ça ne sera pas sous la responsabilité de la National Cyclists Union. Donc c'était le refus, véritable, que les femmes puissent. On ne pouvait pas imaginer, en tout cas cette union cycliste ne pouvait pas imaginer que des femmes aient envie de faire une course cycliste et de battre un record éventuellement dans une course de cycliste. Et voilà donc le commentaire du journaliste, donc 1894. Whatever fantastic tricks the new woman may have played with conventional usages, she has not yet agreed to riding in a cycling path race. It is true that several females were recently discovered racing on a West of England track, but they must not be mentioned in the same breath with the new woman of the period. The real new woman, in her particular relation to sport, is not by any means anxious to vie with men on the cycling path. Her only desire is to reconcile the community to a rational dress, which shall be modest in design and, of course, practical in effect, as the term well denotes. The National Cyclists Union have no doubt been reading some of the American papers in which are contained a number of highly coloured reports dealing with feminine track racing. On one of these occasions, no fewer than 3 out of the 10 competitors were married women. So, you see here, it seems that here the journalist seems to be saying what, in fact? That women wanting to take part in track racing is something that does not exist in Britain. It's something that exists in the United States, but it seems to be, you know, a kind of American fantasy or a kind of American thing. He seems to be confident that in Britain, women are not going to ask for this. That they are not going to ask for this. And he thinks that if the National Cyclists Union has decided to ban women from races, it's just to prevent them from applying to these races. Not because there were cases of women wanting to ride a bicycle in an official race. And he seems to be thinking that this originality is just an American originality, and he insists that some of the competitors were even married ladies. You imagine? So, according to him, in 1894, the new woman is not going to ask for this in Britain. The only thing she is interested in is the fight for the rational dress, the divided skirts that we've mentioned just before. So he seems to be reassuring the British public about the fact that, well, of course, the National Union of Cyclists has decided on this, but probably it's just a protective measure, but nobody will ask for such a thing. And he seems to be reassuring the readers about the fact that, their fight is just about rational dress, which is still something acceptable. So again, a reaction of the time on the emancipation of women. And the last text I'd like to have a look at for today is the one on feminine footballers, female football, feminine footballers, at the beginning of the booklet. Qu'est-ce que je fais? Ce que je voulais. It's the second text, just after the first cartoon. And you see how each time in these articles, the emancipated woman is called the new woman with capital letters. It's really the expression that was used at the time. It's not an invention of the 20th century. It's really a word, an expression that was used at the time by the women themselves, who considered they were new in the sense that they acted differently from their mothers and their grandmothers, but also by the critics of this new woman movement. So let's read this text. We live in an age of progress, and the new woman is the latest evidence of the advancement. Anybody who had predicted the appearance of ladies between the lines would have been looked at more in sorrow than anger. Yet, are we already in possession of a group of fair performers styled the British Ladies Football Club with Lady Florence Dixie as the president? So this time it's about women entering a typically male sphere, which is the sphere of sport, and more particularly the sphere of football. And when you see what is said about professional football even today, female professional football even today, you see that women have been fighting for more than a century to be accepted in the football world, and that things are not entirely done even today. So Miss Nettie J. Honeyball is, je ne sais pas s'il a inventé d'ailleurs le nom, parce que Honeyball is the secretary and captain of what may be fairly described as the sporting sensation of the hour, and if energy and enthusiasm can command success, then surely is the association already pressured of victory. As I saw her in a pretty little study in Crouch End, a thoughtful-looking young lady with a strong personality, I at once dispelled the suspicion of burlesque that came into my mind. The article is interesting because obviously the journalist is not against feminine football, which was probably very rare at the time, but still he has preconceptions about it. Initially, when he went to visit this young lady, he thought that the spectacle would be a burlesque, would be a grotesque spectacle. And he seems to be quite surprised to see that it's not as grotesque as he thought. "You are right," said Miss Honeyball, putting aside an ominous batch of correspondence to give me some details. "There is nothing of the farcical nature about the British Ladies Football Club. I founded the association late last year with the fixed resolve of proving to the world that women are not the ornamental and useless creatures men have pictured. I must confess my convictions on all matters where the sexes are so widely divided are all on the side of emancipation, and I look forward to the time when ladies may sit in Parliament and have a voice in the direction of affairs, especially those which concern them most. Then, I may take it, you also anticipate a time when big league football clubs will be composed of players both male and female. Such a consummation is of course very far distant. It has not happened yet, but it is possible. You must remember we do not profess to the strength of men." Miss Honeyball did not mention brute force like the lady in rebellious Susan, but we claim the science, and in my opinion football is just the exercise to promote health and grace among women. But have all your members the moral courage to face public attendances on the field? Et là on voit bien la réaction de l'homme typique qui n'est pas anti-football féminin, mais qui dit quoi en fait? Est-ce qu'une femme, elle va oser se montrer en public en gros? Est-ce qu'elle va oser se montrer en spectacle au public? C'est ça qui l'inquiète. Est-ce qu'elle aura the moral courage? Comme si la femme était trop faible pour jouer au foot devant un public d'hommes. Why not? There's nothing at all questionable in our costume. When Lady Florence Dixie consented to become president, she specially stipulated that if the club were to attain its end, the girls should enter into the spirit of the game with heart and soul. I will have nothing to do with balloon sleeves and trained skirts and anything like that, she said. Don't court ridicule by ridiculing yourselves. Accordingly, we all have our costumes of divided skirts. Donc vous voyez l'importance du divided skirts, a sort of blue serge knickerbocker, and the teams will be distinguished by wearing respectively cardinal and pale blue blouses. You will detect no nervousness in the girls when they make their first public appearance. We practice twice a week. I suppose you had a good deal of trouble in obtaining members. Not at all. I have players from all parts of London, and a few even have to travel from the farther suburbs. They number close upon 30, and 3 or 4 are married, the ages varying from 15 to 26. Of course, when we first began, complaints were made of stiffness and soreness, but that soon wore off, and you would be surprised to see the energy thrown into the game. Our original idea was to play our first match on January the 12th, but a good many difficulties stood in the way, and we decided to postpone it till the end of this month on the Crouch End ground, and we would call it North versus South. Then, if we attain any sort of success, we hope to visit a few of the provinces and endeavour to foster the game among the ladies there. You may expect an amount of adverse criticism. I know it. Already the comic papers are burlesqued the notion right and left. All the members are of the middle class, else how could they spare the time and expense to indulge in practice? Well, in the first, how did you get about getting the team together? In the first instance, I advertised, etc., etc. And then at the end, I told the girls plainly at the outset, they were all strangers to me, except my sister, that if they ever wished to give up, to tell me at once, and I would get others to take their places. But so far from that, the attendance of practice is astonishingly good. We had a little test game one day, and one side won by 8 goals, etc. And then the commentary by the journalist. Since interviewing Miss Honeyball, I have had the pleasure of witnessing the members of the BLFC at practice, and must confess to a feeling of surprise at the amount of ability already attained. Although the occasion of my visit was not favourable meteorologically, the ladies went about their various duties pluckily and energetically, skill and shooting power making up for the lack of speed and force. Donc là, on retrouve quand même le discours un petit peu paternaliste. Ah, bien sûr, elles ne sont pas très fortes, enfin, elles ne sont pas très fortes, elles ne sont pas puissantes, parce que c'est des femmes, donc elles sont faibles. Mais elles ont de l'énergie, elles ont, etc. Donc il y a un discours qui reste paternaliste, mais qui, pour l'époque, est quand même relativement ouvert par rapport à cette idée de femmes qui pourraient entrer dans le monde du sport, et notamment du football. D'accord? Donc j'ai voulu commencer par regarder différents textes de l'époque pour voir les réactions. Et donc dans les 2 prochaines semaines, on se concentre sur une analyse justement de l'émancipation de la femme et notamment de son entrée dans la sphère publique et de la question du suffrage. Voilà. On comprend qu'il y a encore du boulot aujourd'hui.